Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Timothy and I are back once more for another exciting installment of Tim Tom's Film Nights, where we get together, consume copious amounts of tea, and discuss films of all shapes and sizes. Tonight, we'll be embarking on a journey into the world of superheroes with Superhero Movie, directed by Craig Mazin. Now, before we delve too deep into the plot, characters, or any other facets of this cinematic masterpiece, let me just take a moment to welcome our viewers, both old and new. We are so delighted you've joined us tonight.
Well said, Thomas. I must say I was pleasantly surprised by this film when I first watched it. It had some genuinely funny moments, and I found myself chuckling quite frequently throughout the duration of the movie. However, it wasn't perfect in my eyes. The plot felt a bit too convoluted at times, and the character development left much to be desired in my humble opinion. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Thomas, what were your thoughts on Superhero Movie?
Oh dear, Timothy, we are always at odds, aren't we? I must admit that I found this film rather lackluster is the word I would use. The humor felt forced and uninspired to me, and the plot was so predictable it left me wanting more. But perhaps my expectations were set too high, given my love for genuine superhero movies, like, the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy or the Marvel Cinematic Universe films. Regardless, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the film's characters and performances. Who stood out for you?
Well, I must admit that Drake Bell did a commendable job as the titular superhero. He had the perfect mix of naivety and determination that made his character quite likable. However, Sara Paxton's performance as the love interest left much to be desired, in my opinion. She seemed stiff and unconvincing throughout the movie. But enough about the acting. Let us delve into the plot and discuss some of its more intriguing moments. Tom, what did you think?
Well, Timothy, I must say, while the film did attempt some clever parody elements from classic superhero tropes, it fell short in execution. The plot revolves around a nerdy teenager named Gary, who develops superpowers after accidentally absorbing some radioactive material. Initially thrilled with his newfound abilities, Gary decides to become the eponymous superhero and fight crime in Metro City. However, things quickly turn sour when an evil genius named Professor Xavier realizes that he can control superheroes' actions through the use of a device called the Infector. In a twisted plot to take over the city, Xavier recruits his henchman Rebel and sets the stage for a climactic confrontation between superhero and his arch-nemesis. The movie tries hard to poke fun at superhero cliches, but many of its jokes feel dated and predictable. The action sequences are cartoonishly exaggerated, bordering on unwatchable at times, and the CGI is painfully obvious. While there are some moments sprinkled throughout that do elicit a chuckle or two, overall Superhero Movie falls short of its parodying ambitions, in my humble opinion. What sayest thou, Timothy?
Well, Thomas, one interesting fact about the film's production is that it faced quite a few challenges during shooting. The production team had to deal with several weather issues while trying to shoot scenes involving superpowers and stunts. In addition, the cast and crew had to work with limited resources and tight budgets, which led to some creative compromises in terms of set design and special effects. Despite these obstacles, they managed to bring the film to life, albeit with mixed results, as we've discussed earlier. However, one behind-the-scenes tidbit that I found particularly fascinating is how the filmmakers used practical effects instead of CG whenever possible. For example, the scene where superhero crashes into a building was actually filmed using a real helicopter and set made from foam and cardboard to ensure safety for both the cast and crew members. This commitment to practicality adds a layer of authenticity to the film's cheeky parody of superhero tropes. Don't you think?
Well, Timothy, I must admit that I do appreciate a good bit of practical effects over CG-heavy CG-ness. It does add a nice touch of nostalgia to the film, reminding me of classic action flicks from the 80s and 90s. However, I still stand by my previous statement that Superhero Movie falls short in terms of its parodying ambitions. The humor feels forced and uninspired, and while there are some moments that elicit a chuckle or two, they're far between the tedious plot points and uninteresting characters. But let us not dwell on the negatives too much. What would be your ideal superhero movie like? Who would you cast in the lead role? And what sort of villainous mastermind would you pit them against?
Well, Thomas, if I were to create my perfect superhero film, it would have a mix of elements from both classic and modern superhero movies. For starters, I'd cast Tom Holland as the titular hero. He has the perfect balance of innocence and determination that makes Spider-Man so relatable. As for the villainous mastermind, I'd go with a twisted take on Professor Xavier, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. He exudes charismatic charm that masks his sinister intentions. The plot would revolve around a young tech genius named Peter Parker, who accidentally becomes superpowered after an experiment gone wrong. Initially thrilled with his newfound abilities, he decides to use them for good and fight crime in the fictional city of Metropolis. However, things quickly turn sour when Professor Xavier recruits him using a device called the Infector, which manipulates Peter's actions and twists his heroic intentions into a villainous rampage. Throughout the film, we see Peter struggling with his newfound power and identity, trying to control himself while battling the influence of Professor Xavier and his henchmen. The film would have a mix of fast-paced action sequences and heartfelt moments, delving into themes of morality, responsibility, and the consequences of unchecked power. And just like you mentioned earlier, Thomas, I'd also aim for a balance between practical effects and subtle CG to enhance the realism of the film. What do you think? Would you watch this hypothetical superhero movie?
Well, Timothy, I must admit that your hypothetical superhero movie sounds rather enticing. However, let us return our attention back to the film at hand, superhero movie. Despite its shortcomings in terms of humor and plot, there are a few moments that do stand out for me. For instance, the scene where Gary's parents find out about his superpowers is quite amusing due to their overreaction and lack of understanding. And I must commend Leslie Nielsen for his portrayal of Professor Xavier, even if it does feel somewhat underused in the grand scheme of things. But enough about the film's positives. Let us delve into its flaws.
Oh dear, Thomas, you are always so quick to find fault in everything, aren't you? Well, I must say that while superhero movie does have its moments, it fails to fully capitalize on its parody potential. The humor often feels forced and predictable, and the plot is too convoluted for its own good. However, one element that I do appreciate about the film is its use of practical effects instead of relying heavily on CG. As we discussed earlier, this adds a layer of authenticity to the film's cheeky parody of superhero trope. But enough about my personal opinions. What are your thoughts on the actors and their performances in superhero movie?
Well, Timothy, I must say that while some of the performances in superhero movie are passable, others fall flat on their faces. Drake Bell does a decent job as our titular hero, but he lacks the charisma and charm needed to truly carry the film. Sara Paxton's performance as the love interest suffers from similar issues. She comes across as stiff and unconvincing throughout the movie. On the bright side, Leslie Nielsen brings his usual deadpan humor to the table as Professor Xavier. But even he can't save this sinking ship. However, I must commend Christopher McDonald for his portrayal of the villainous rebel. He manages to infuse his character with just enough menace and unpredictability to make him somewhat entertaining. Overall, the casting choices for superhero movie feel like a missed opportunity to create truly memorable characters that audiences can root for or against.
That's an interesting take on the performances, Thomas. Personally, I found Drake Bell's portrayal of superhero to be quite endearing and relatable. His naivety coupled with his determination to do good reminds me a bit of Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four films. As for Sara Paxton as the love interest, well, perhaps she could have benefited from more screen time or better dialogue to really shine in that role. Christopher McDonald's Rebel certainly was an entertaining villain. His over-the-top antics provided some much-needed comic relief amidst all the chaos on screen. I also think Leslie Nielsen did a fantastic job as Professor Xavier, despite being underused in the film. His deadpan delivery of absurd lines and situations was truly iconic, and it's always a pleasure to see him in these types of roles. It's clear that the cast had their moments, but they were unfortunately hindered by the overall lackluster writing and direction of the film.
That's true, Tim. The script certainly didn't do any favors for the actors, with its predictable jokes and uninspired plot. It's a shame because there were moments where I thought the cast was really trying to make something out of nothing. But alas, we can only hope that they found some satisfaction in knowing they were part of such a cult classic. In any case, let's move on to discussing the cultural significance of superhero movie. As someone who grew up with comic books and superhero films, I can't help but feel like this movie was ahead of its time in some ways. It pokes fun at the tropes that have since become staples in modern-day superhero movies, which I think is quite clever. Additionally, it showcases the power of parody and satire in storytelling by exaggerating these tropes to absurd levels. Superhero movie highlights their potential flaws and shortcomings while also reminding us why we love them so much in the first place. What are your thoughts on this aspect of the film, Timothy? Do you think superhero movie holds any cultural significance despite its shortcomings as a parody or as a film in general?
Well, Thomas, I must say that while superhero movie may have its flaws as a parody and film overall, it does hold some cultural significance, in my opinion. As you mentioned earlier, the film pokes fun at tropes that have since become staples in modern-day superhero movies, which is quite clever and perhaps ahead of its time. By exaggerating these tropes to absurd levels, it highlights their potential flaws and shortcomings while also reminding us why we love them so much. Moreover, as a fan of both superhero films and parody movies, I appreciate the attempt to blend these two genres together. While superhero movie may not have succeeded in its ambitions entirely, it paved the way for future parody films that have managed to find their footing within the superhero genre. Films like Deadpool and Shazam both credit superhero movie as an influence on their own unique blend of action, comedy, and self-awareness. Additionally, I believe that superhero movie serves as a reminder of the power of satire and storytelling. By using humor to critique and examine societal norms and expectations, films like these can encourage us to think more critically about the stories we consume and the messages they send. While some may argue that the film's humor falls flat or that it relies too heavily on cheap gags, I believe there is value in its attempt to provoke thought through satire. In conclusion, while superhero movie is not without its flaws as a parody and as a film overall, it does hold cultural significance for its influence on the superhero genre's blend with parody and self-awareness. Its use of satire to critique societal norms and expectations, albeit in an exaggerated manner, serves as a reminder of the power of humor as a tool for analysis and reflection. What are your thoughts on this aspect of superhero movie, Thomas?
Well, Timothy, it's been a wild ride discussing superhero movie. While I personally found it to be more of a roller coaster ride than an enjoyable journey, I do appreciate the attempts it made to blend superhero tropes with parody and satire. Despite its shortcomings, I can see how this film may have been ahead of its time in some ways, paving the way for future successes like Deadpool and Shazam. In conclusion, Superhero Movie is a film that will be remembered for both its moments of laughter and cringe-worthy scenes. It's not a perfect parody nor an outstanding superhero movie, but it does serve as a reminder of the power of satire to provoke thought and reflection. It may not have reached superhero status in my book, but it did manage to entertain us with its absurdity and self-awareness. So, dear viewers, what were your thoughts on Superhero Movie? Did you find it more of a hero or villain in the world of film parody? Let us know in the comments section below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and fellow superhero enthusiasts. And don't forget to join us next time when we'll be tackling another beloved movie, discussing its pros and cons. and probably arguing about whether it qualifies as a true classic, or just another attempt at cashing in on existing franchises. Until then, farewell, and don't forget to save your city from the next wave of boring movies.